But when you get into that space when you're with other people, it's really magical.
There's this moment at the top where all space, all time, everything disappears.
And when it works and you finish a song in a day and you're sitting there and you're just going like, whoa, something out of nothing, you know, and you can share that with people. It really is magical.
The pursuit of knowing you exist, where I get to connect again. Exactly what you're saying. It's just a different arena. All right, friends. So today I get to interview Andrew McMahon. What an amazing human. He's a musician, songwriter, performer, cancer survivor, has a daughter and a wife, started a charity called the Deerjack Foundation, which we're going to participate in. So listen in on what it's like to be in his shoes and live a life of overcoming and resilience and becoming and performing and doing all the things. So I hope you enjoy as much as I did. All right, friends, today I have Andrew McMahon on the podcast. I know you're excited. My son wanted to skip school. I made him go, but we're going to go visit him at a concert. So Andrew, thank you for showing up today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's such an honor. I climbed Mount Everest with Mike Posner. So I'm sure you're familiar with him. Yes.
Oh, yeah. He's incredible. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
He's incredible. Yes. It was such a lucky experience because he liked to sing to calm himself down. And we were like, please, like, can we get you riled up again and sing some more? And he wrote a whole bunch of songs after that expedition based on the experiences that he had. It was pretty cool.
That's incredible. Wow. You guys are very impressive. That I don't know if I have an Everest climb in me, but who knows? Maybe I'll leave this inspired.
Who knows, right? I mean, and metaphorical Everest exists for all of us. So let's be honest. You don't have to do the physical Everest. We all have an Everest in our future. Okay, so what got you into music and when?
Gosh, I was a kid. So I was into music as a little boy early on. I had 4 older brothers and sisters. My parents were, children of the 60s. So there was lots of music in my house all the time. But the real sort of turning point for me, we had my uncle, my mother's brother passed away when I was, I guess, about 8 years old. And that was a really sort of devastating loss for not just for me, obviously, but for my entire family. He was sort of in a lot of ways, a big figure, had a big personality, an entrepreneur. He did amazing things, was super fun and funny and all, was a big kid. So especially I think for all the young kids and the cousins, like losing him was really, was a really potent and heartbreaking experience. And in the midst of that grieving process, I found my way to the family piano, and it was just like this sort of puzzle piece that clicked in for me. I remember just sort of sitting down at the keys of the piano, moving around a chord that I had learned from a friend's father who was a piano player, and just moving that chord around, and all of a sudden words started coming and melodies started coming, and I wrote my first song, and it was about shortly after my 9th birthday, maybe. And so that's really, at the heart of why I do it, I think is that it's like a coping mechanism for me. It's a way that I process my day. And fortunately, it's something that has stuck with me and made it possible to sort of author my own story and find musicians that will join me on a stage, and it's turned into a career for the last 20 plus years.
Was there ever a time where you're like, no, this isn't going to work?
There was a brief period of time in my family was going through a really difficult time when I was about 12, 13 years old, where I sort of like, I think I was going through my own sort of depression and stopped playing. And for a year, I just didn't play the piano. And that was really the only time that I kind of walked away from it thinking maybe it was a phase or something like that, But there have been moments in my life that that have been scary, where I didn't think I was going to live, and thought that maybe it was the end, but no, for the most part, it's always been there for me. I've gone through writer's blocks, and I've had those sort of darker moments. But even when that happens now, I think I've been on this journey long enough that I sort of recognize the peaks and the valleys enough to say it will come back, and I get a little less nervous than I used to.
Yeah, isn't that true? where we're just like, oh, this is actually how my body does this, or this is what my body is telling me. And I just have to honor the process instead of try to short circuit the message that it's giving. The beauty of wisdom as we get older, right? Like we're leveling up. We're leveling up is what I tell my kids. Okay. So did you, like you fell for the piano. Did you teach yourself then, or did you take lessons, or how did that evolve?
Yeah, so I started as more or less self-taught. I had taken a few lessons as a very young kid, like in the first grade, and I really didn't like it. And it was years later that I actually started writing and really playing. And so I, in that first year, I mean, I would come home from school and I would just play until my parents said I had to go to bed. I mean, that was just that was sort of my initial teaching, was just listening to music on the radio and learning how to play it by ear and writing songs and writing songs and writing songs. Eventually, I'd say about in the fifth grade, so about 10 years old, I want to say, I just hit a roadblock where it was like I couldn't move my fingers anymore and discover new things. It was like I was just starting to hit a wall. And so I asked for piano lessons, and I studied classical for a few years at a conservatory in Ohio where we lived. And I hated it. I really didn't like doing it. But somehow I convinced myself to go every week because it did open up. I started understanding music theory. I started learning how to read, and it definitely made my chord shapes and the way I approach things better. So I did that for a few years, and then around high school, I started working with the choir teacher and sort of music director at our school, and he would give me little lessons in between classes and things like that, and that sort of stuck with me through high school.
Interesting. And when you were writing, was it negative, positive, neutral? Like, what was the theme typically for you? Because it was this way of you processing.
I think at that stage, mostly it was hopeful. I mean, I think there was, I think for me, I used and still use the piano as like a filter of hope over the difficult things that I might be going through. I think it's a way to sort of make peace with things that I'm having a hard time with, but also to push through. So it really, in a way, it's the answer. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. I've definitely written my share of depressing songs for sure. I think I found over the years that the ones that mean the most to me are songs that find me when I maybe am in a darker place, but help to lift me out of it. And I think there's a pretty long history with all three of my bands of those kinds of songs being the ones that people gravitate towards the most as well.
And we seem to connect in pain. I mean, right? I mean, it's just where we feel seen or where we can connect easily to each other. I say this, I have a son that's writing music, and his songs are these like angry songs, right? And one of them is called Time Waster. And it's about this homework that I make him do after school called Kuman. And so he's like, Time Waster. And it's this Kuman homework. And I'm like, buddy, this is so good for your math. You see that you're in advanced math courses? That's because of the Time Waster that you're doing after school. And the only way I get him to do his homework is because of the music. I'm like, if you want to be a good musician, you have to be a good writer. If you want to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. Like these things all collect and relate to each other. And music is a lot of beats that go with numbers. And so we have to do these things, honey. He's so funny.
It's very mathematical. Yeah. I mean, it's funny, like, and I think everybody's different. There's obviously a long lineage of writers that have found their strength in a more aggressive style, or I think that's a beauty of music is it's a vehicle for so many different sort of mindsets and helps people in different ways. For me, I just have always gravitated towards songs that are uplifting or I didn't do very well in the Limp Bizkit era of alternative rock. I'll say that much.
I agree. I loved the piano growing up because it meant I didn't have to do chores. Like, so my piano was my release because my mom would like stop. She'd be like, oh, I loved it when you played piano. So whenever you played piano, I just was doing your chores instead of you because I wanted you to keep playing. And then whenever I had a bad day, it was something I was good at. so then I could get back into the rhythm of something that I was good at and discard the thing that I wasn't good at until I was ready to come back with more confidence.
It's a very healing instrument. At least I've found it to be so for myself.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you're doing life and you graduate from high school. You go to college? No college.
No, I sort of made a deal with my mom, which is one that I planned on reneging on if it didn't work out the way that it was that she had mapped out. But by the time I graduated high school, my first band, Something Corporate, had achieved a pretty good amount of local success. So we were selling out clubs in town. We had developed a fan base that had started sort of, going past the school district lines and into other parts of the state. And I got into college, which is shocking because I was not a great student, but I got into school and I deferred for a year, told my mom that if I didn't get my band signed, within a year of my graduating, then I go to school. And miraculously, we signed a record contract almost like a year to the date of my high school graduation. So that sort of began the journey of, playing professionally and being signed and having managers and agents and a label and all that. And that was around 2001, the year after I graduated.
Okay. And then, so you signed, you're playing music, things are going well. And then all of a sudden cancer shows up. So like, how does this come into your life and how do you know, and what, like all of that?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's beyond life changing and it's a million things. I think for me, it was from the time that Something Corporate had been signed to the moment that I got sick, it was like I packed so much life into this very, very short window. 2001 to early 2005. It's like we had gone from zero to, traveling the world and selling hundreds of thousands of records and having a real career for this band that I started, but also I think growing apart too, right? We were like high school kids and living on top of each other. And we had this amazing run and decided to take a break. And I made a new record and started another project, just in my bedroom, basically. And I found out I was sick sort of right as I was about to launch my second project, right as I was about to launch this new thing, that the music that I had was certain it was the best music I had ever made. It was this thing I spent every dollar I made was Something Corporate. I just dumped into writing and recording this record, and so I think it was terrifying, but it was just a strange moment to get sick, right? Like I had basically started my life over again and was just feeling like I had found my purpose, and had found.
You're invincible at this point, right? Like you had success. Now you have your own thing. You put everything back into it and you're ready to share it with the world.
It was crazy, the timing, because I was so certain I was on the right path. And it was helpful in that sense that when I got sick, I was like, wow, I've never been more sure about my direction ever in my life. And then this thing pops up. And so in that moment, I really tried to say, well, if I'm encountering this cancer on this road that could not be any more sure is the right road, then this is supposed to be on the road with me, and that got me through a lot of it. It was this sort of sense of fate that I attached to that diagnosis, but it was a grueling journey, to say the least.
And when you were first diagnosed, did they say, hey, you have this % chance of living? I mean, did they give you those stats?
No, I think, I was diagnosed with what they call acute lymphocytic leukemia. And it's a disease that's way more common in children. If you're young when you get it, I think usually it's somewhere between 3 and 8 years old. Say this is when you're gonna get ALL. Don't quote me on that, but somewhere in there, you have a 90% plus chance of living, right? And then it sort of skips usually into a much older demographic where your chances will go way down. So I think the general thought was maybe it was a 50-50 shot, when I was diagnosed, which are odds I'll take at a casino, it was dicey, but I was really lucky in the sense that in early on we found out my sister was a match for a bone marrow or stem cell transplant.
Yeah, you said that. I read that somewhere that she was a match, which is, what are the odds of that being? I mean, you had 4 siblings, right? But it's still pretty low.
Yeah, well, my sister, Katie, who was my donor, was my only full blood sibling, right? My 3 older siblings were from my mom's first marriage, so I basically had one shot at an 18 to 20% chance, and she was it, which turned out to be a godsend. I got pneumonia in my first round of chemotherapy that was almost deadly. And so there was a real sense that persisted with the 3-year chemo regimen, which was typical, that pneumonia was going to be in the background. And so when Kate proved to be a viable option for a transplant, my doctor basically said, look, this isn't a common approach to your cancer. Usually you would go on this 3-year chemo regimen, but he felt strongly that was my best shot at survival. And so we swung the big bat, and here I am 18 years later.
What a blessing, right? I mean, isn't that amazing? You can't even plan that stuff. It just works. No, I've read that. And I was like, wow, how empowering for her, how empowering for you. What a unique way that got to unfold for both of you. So one of the things that I did read about you sharing, which I think is so important to highlight, is you get physically better, but there's a big mental piece that a lot of times gets left out of what some of our stories are shared. So talk about that, because that was a big part of your 20s, really, that whole decade almost.
It's tough to look back at it now. I think it's the hardest piece of this whole puzzle, is realizing how long I stayed in a state that was just so unhealthy, right? It wasn't, I try to be clear that it wasn't all bad, right? It was just, I just stayed on this roller coaster that I could have gotten off of at any time. And I stayed on it for 5 or 6 years, and I think, you get your body better. And for me, I was very fortunate. Mine got better quicker than a lot of people with the same diagnosis. There are people who deal with all sorts of fallout from the chemo and the radiation and all these things. And for me, I was able to kind of like just will myself back onto a stage and back into a studio and like really try and plant a flag that said, like, I'm still young. I'm still tough. I can, like, this didn't happen.
I'm alive, right? Like, I'm alive. Like, I'm doing things that show you I'm alive.
There was a healthy component to that for a time. And then it sort of tipped over into, really running from the post-traumatic stress, the fear that came along with all of it. And just running to the road, really, which is like, that had been my home for so many years ahead of this illness, that it was like, I kept myself on tour 8 to 10 months a year, where it was very easy to sort of like deflect and not, because it's a pirate's life out there, really. I mean, you're partying, you're in a new city every day. You feel like you feel so powerful. You're on a stage and you're singing these songs and people are singing back to you. It's just like, it's surreal and it's great. But if you're using it as I was, which was a Band-Aid to a much bigger sort of psychological reaction to what I'd gone through, it could be really bad. And I'm really fortunate that I survived that part of it, and that my wife stayed with me through all of that, and eventually really pushed me to seek therapy and to try and, I say once and for all, but at least just try to just address the scar of what this thing was that had happened. And my life got infinitely better from the moment that I actually just like hopped off that particular roller coaster and sought therapy and really started kind of trying to unpack what had happened to me.
Right. Well, and I think everybody that's listening can relate to this story, not on the performing side, but the running, right? The staying hyper busy so I don't have to face whatever's going on, the staying, I'm doing these other things. And then all of a sudden something happens where you're like, if you look back, I don't know if I want my life to be like this, but you have to have that awareness to make the change, because you're doing what's comfortable. Like, you're doing what your body knows. Like, this is the loop that's comfortable. It might not be the best loop, but at least it's comfortable. And that unknown is scary. And you had an unknown show up in your life that is an extremely scary unknown. So like, where do you grab control? Where do you get that sense of security that you were trying to not admit that you didn't have? Like, it's really hard to admit that we don't have much more control than what we have. And that can be scary. So your wife was a big catalyst in helping you say, listen, we need to do life a different way. And you listened, which is amazing.
Yeah, well, I wasn't really given much of a choice at the time.
And that's amazing too. Good for her.
Yeah, which is, and I think it speaks to her strength for sure, and my good fortune to have somebody in my corner who, like, because I think we were both so young when this was going on, right? So there was nobody for us to lean on, like, there was nobody to relate to in that moment. You couldn't say, hey, I mean, I think in a weird way, the couple that we most closely identified with was a friend of ours that we went to high school with, and her whose husband had come back from Iraq, and I don't say that to compare myself to a soldier, but I think there were all of these similar feelings of trauma that neither of us were willing to address at the time. And then you had these women who were trying really hard to keep the train on the tracks, and it was really difficult. And she had a close friend who was dealing with that. And I think eventually she just realized, like, it wasn't going to be sustainable, like after the first couple of years, it's like, oh, this is just a part of it. And then after 3 or 4, then it's like, wait, I don't want to live like this anymore, and she threw down the gauntlet for sure, and was just like, you have a choice. You can start trying to make this better and try and figure yourself out, or like, I'm just not going to be around here anymore. And I was like, okay, that's not something that's not a loss I'm willing to take. So I went to work. She put me to work.
I think that's amazing. I mean, that's wonderful. When did Cecilia come into the picture?
A couple of years after that. Yeah.
A couple of years after. That's what I thought. I was like doing timing wise, like where that all happened, because I think for me, I mean, I was building a business and then I had a child and I was like, I'm going to therapy. Like, are you kidding me? Like, this thing is the most amazing thing that could possibly happen. I am not the best version of me. Like, therapy, whatever I can do to be a better version of me for this child, I'm all in.
Yeah. And that was, it was weird how much space, like, I think because once I started finding some forgiveness for myself and making some peace with the things that I couldn't control and how my life had changed, and also started realizing, like, my life was great. Like I was living so much in this space of, like, the before and the after this traumatic event. And sometimes it just takes time to build up good memories and see, like, oh, the life on the other side of this is actually pretty good. Slowly, I kind of started just emerging from that, from the fog of all of those years, made the decision to wind down my second band. My second band, Jack's Mannequin, had put out 3 records, had done really well, could have easily kept going, but it just felt like I needed to put space between. A lot of my cancer got written into those records, right? And I was diagnosed, or I was put in the hospital the day I finished the first Jack's Mannequin record, and so there was just so much of it was wrapped up in that. I was like, okay, I'm going to wind this down and just be out here and try and figure out what's next. And in doing that, I found new management. I decided I'd start a project under my own name. I started writing with writers I'd never met, going into rooms that were super uncomfortable, and really, like, pushing myself to just do my music in a way that I had never done it before. In the middle of all of that, Kelly and I, we had this conversation one night where it was just like, we just knew. It was like, oh, we're going to have a kid, we were never like kid people. That was like never on our agenda. And then me getting sick, it was like, oh, this is never happening. But then, yeah, we did. And we did the IVF, and, like I had fried everything in my cancer, but luckily I was forced to retain some swimmers, before they battered me with all the, and we got Cecilia out of that. So.
That's magic. Yes. Okay. So walk me into a writer's room, because us on the outside, we hear about them, right? And I'm like, I'm kind of jealous because I just wrote a book. I wish I had a writer's room where we could throw all these ideas on a wall and be like, okay, this is how this is going to formulate. But a book is a little bit more intimate of experience, or at least mine was this time. So it was less of a writer's room and more of me. So what is it like being in a writer's room?
Always terrified. I get so nervous. So the way I started writing was just me and a piano, and it was this very personal confessional sort of thing, right? And that's how I've gotten to so much of my best music has been this, like, it's the intimacy level is about as high as it could be, you know? And so, I mean, I remember when the first, I mean, I've done it a couple of times throughout the years, but I really committed to this as a process in, like, I'd say about 2013, 2012, somewhere in there. And you're going in there. And I think to do what you do well, at least for me, you have to be very vulnerable, right? And so especially when you're going on like what I call blind dates, you know, where you're going in with one or two writers you've never met, a lot of it, you kind of start with like breaking the ice, you know, trying to figure out a little bit about people, where they come from, what they listen to, what they, you know, where they are in their career and their lives, et cetera. And then eventually at some point somebody goes, okay, what are we going to do? You know, and can be really, really difficult because you just have to find your way to music and you have to do it collectively. I'd say 60 to 70% of the time, it doesn't get you to a good song, at least for me. You'll make great friends, or you'll end up doing another good one the next day or whatever. And it's not to say you make a bad song, but sometimes you don't quite hit that magic, right? But the 30% of the time when it connects, right, it is this beautiful flow state, right? And it's most of the time when I'm in a flow state, that's something it's alone, right? It's surfing. It's me and the piano. But when you get into that space, when you're with other people, it's really magical, right? And you know, like just because we talked about Cecilia, like I wrote Cecilia and the Satellite on a blind date with two writers I'd never met until that day. And we batted ideas back and forth. And then sort of like the first two chords showed up for that song. And I've got these two guys here and one guy's programming drums and I'm playing these two chords and we're like, whoa, what's that? And then you start throwing lines out and everybody's just volleying and you have to, it's a dance. It's a real dance. And when it works and you finish a song in a day and you're sitting there and you're just going, whoa, something out of nothing, and you can share that with people. It really is magical.
No, I mean, it sounds magical here and you describe it. And when I'm writing, I have a voice in my head, right? So I'm hearing how it's sounding when I'm writing the words down. And I was wondering, because you're not only writing words, you're mixing words with sound. And then that gives you emphasis or gives you space, because it's really the space between the notes that gives the significance to the sound. And so I didn't know if you're hearing it and then putting words and then putting sound. Does that make any sense on how I'm saying that?
Totally. I think the reason that this craft has held my attention for as long as it has is that for me, there is no, this is the path, right? It really is, when it's at its best, it just feels kind of divine, and you just sort of are an open channel. And, sometimes it's, oh, that melody, and you hum a melody, and then all of a sudden the word comes next, or you have this line that you wrote down in a journal a week before, and you open that page up while you hear this thing, and you sing those words right over the top of it, and it just opens up a door. It's almost like a series of doors opening. It's like, oh, you've got this kind of cool progression, and then all of a sudden you sing this thing and another door opens, and then the words show up, and then, oh, like if you're doing it while you're producing a track, if you're producing a track while you're writing, then all of a sudden it's like maybe there's a change in the feel of the drums and it makes you think of this, and it's just kind of this thread that you're pulling until hopefully you get to to the finish, and there's something there for you. No,
I love it. When I climb a mountain and I get to the top, there's this moment at the top where all space, all time, everything disappears. And you're one with all of it. There's no separation. There's nothing. And so you're in that, and you want to hold that spot as long as you can, but the exhale starts to separate you again, right? And you just realize that's not a place we can live. It's a place we can touch, but we don't get to live there. And so then when you start coming back and you start separating, and the sun's here and the world's below you, and you almost take your soul and throw it back out and say, I can't wait to meet you again. I don't know what it's going to look like or how it's going to show up, but I know it's in this journey that the pursuit of knowing you exist, where I get to connect again. Exactly what you're saying. It's just a different arena.
Yeah. We have these pursuits, right? Because there's a moment where you feel sort of tuned to your highest consciousness, or you feel most in tune with a greater consciousness, or whatever it is, and I get little I get little bits of that when I meditate, or, like whether it's climbing a mountain or writing a song or whatever it is. I think these are the sort of the pursuits that if we're lucky in life, we have things like this. Each individual has that version of it, whatever it is, if it's, if it's physical or if it's, I mean, I tend to think there's a physical component to that feeling, right? Like you have to
embody it. Like it can't just be in your cerebral mix. It has to be something you feel. And that's why I think we love music, right? It brings us to that feeling in our body where it's not just something we understand. It's something that we get to embody. And when we can embody something, it's just a whole different level of experience for all of us. So when you write the music and then you go to share it with us at concerts, does it ever feel like, oh man, I've sang this song like 20 times. How do I get back into the space? Or do you have this, I mean, when I played sports, every single time you had this routine. And then when you got into the game, it was like you're in the game and you totally like lost everything until the game was over. Is it more like that?
They're sort of partitioned in a way for me, right? I think that I'm really lucky. Like I've always loved to perform. Even before I started writing songs, like I loved acting and I try out for the plays and so I think really it was this great combination of when I started writing music, it was like, oh, maybe this leads to a stage. And then when I found myself on a stage, it was like, okay, you're a performer, right? And so I think you have part of me that's like a writer and and a creative, and you have the part of me that I think is a performer and an entertainer. I connect emotionally to these songs every night. It's a part of the theater of it, right? Is getting yourself in the headspace where you can be present for what that song meant to you at one point or means to me now, right? But to me, the show is about connection, right? And it's about how do you turn a stage into a way that there's multiple connections happening, right? As opposed to like, it's just me going out and just pushing myself out into an audience, right?
The exchange of the energy between both you and them. Yeah.
That's it. And so that's a whole other version of the dance, right? So there's ways to do that, right? I mean, there are obvious ways of like just theater and showmanship, right? And just like being big and running and I feel most myself and most at home on a stage. It's my happy place, right? But I can lose my train of thought sometimes. I like speaking to what you're saying. I can be in a song that I've sung a lot of times, and all of a sudden my mind can wander, and I can start thinking about what's happening afterwards. And I keep a little Buddha on my piano, just like as my sort of like drishti, like, hey, like you're losing it, focus, like be right here, be in this moment. But no, I mean, if I'm tired of playing a certain song, I just don't play it. I have so many songs now. I'll bring it back into the mix once I'm feeling more connected to it, but for the most part, I feel most present on a stage. It's like, cause you have to command a thing, and you have to create an environment where people feel seen and where you feel seen and where people feel vulnerable and you can feel okay to be vulnerable. And there's a lot of beauty in that. And it's a place where I thrive.
Well, even just how you explain it is beautiful. Like just understanding that raw connectivity that we all yearn for. And in these environments, you get to provide a space for that to happen. Right. It's such an honor, right?
It's an honor to me. Like the fact that people pay money to see a show, it's like I take it really seriously. I mean, you could argue I maybe take it too seriously sometimes, but I try to be better about that and not beat myself up too much if it doesn't go exactly as planned. But yeah, it's a pretty church-like space for me.
Okay, so this big thing, the Deerjack Foundation, it's Cancer Awareness Month right now in September. You just started off your campaign for that. So let's talk about that organization, because drew me to you, to be honest. That's what got me excited about, okay, here's a human that's going from success to significance. And I want you to share.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's been a work in progress, right? Deerjack has been around now since 2006. So we're going on, we're knocking on the door of 20 years here in a few years, which is crazy to me. But, when Deerjack started, it was right on the heels of my cancer diagnosis. I was in the hospital and I had these fans who were incredible. They were going out on the Warped Tour and making these bracelets that said 11:11 a.m. So 11:11 was kind of like a touchstone from one of my songs and something corporate, and obviously my initials. And these fans went out on the Warped Tour, a tour I was supposed to be on, but I was in the hospital. And they went out and started raising money for the charity that at that point I had kind of deemed in lieu of flowers, which was the Pediatric Cancer Research Foundation. Fast forward a year, I'm back on my feet, and seeing that there's been such an interest in adopting the cause within my fan base, they said, well, maybe we can start bringing that fundraising in-house. We started doing work for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. We started raising money individually as a part of the Deerjack Foundation and giving out grants to other charitable organizations. And then over the past 7-8 years, I just made the leap. I hired an executive director, started building a staff. And I said, we're going to just raise all this money that we raise. We're going to take in-house and build programs that are meaningful specifically for adolescents and young adult cancer patients. So, for your listeners, we say AYA, adolescent, young adult, but that really means people ages 15 all the way up to 39 years of age. And this is the most under-researched, underfunded demographic of cancer patient. There are nearly 100,000 new cases every year. There's 600,000 survivors in the States today. There just aren't a lot of programs for them because you have the peds on one side that there's a lot of attention and for good reason. But then there's this chasm that falls off until you get into the older subset of patients. And so we really wanted to build programs. We do a wish granting program for patients that are in the hospital, a way to kind of put a bright spot on the road that they're on, whether it's through chemo and radiation or whatever they're going through. This program we do 100 wishes a year. We work with 100 different families and patients to try and make those wishes come true, kind of trying to fill the gap. Make-A-Wish ends at 18. So we try and kind of pick up the ball for the AYAs in our world. And then we also created a program for young couples. So we do retreats 4 times a year where a survivor and their spouse or partner can come to a location with 4 or 5 other couples and work with a social worker and yogis, nutritionists, and really kind of try and build in a ramp towards a healthier future as a couple after cancer. Because, as I mentioned earlier, my wife and I really went through it. And the fact that it took us 6 years to get on our feet, we were like, well, maybe we can create a program to shorten that span of time and give people a way to air what they've been through and get that balance back in a relationship.
Yeah. No, I love how you've turned this pain into purpose, right? And I think a lot of us recognize that our pain sometimes is something that gets us so fired up that that's the energy we need to have a solution come about. So the fact that you guys developed this organization right now, it's raising funds. Our goal is 250,000.
That's right. I think we're right around 70,000 right now. So that leaves us about maybe we're getting close to about 2 months out. So the goal is to raise $250,000 between now and November 11th. That helps fund a lot of our programs for the year. We continue fundraising throughout the year, but this is sort of a big sweep where fans create, they create teams, a lot of them, and we offer incentives and prizes. This year, the top 2 individual donors will win. It's yet to be disclosed, but there's a sort of tropical getaway in the future for the top individual donors that I think is going to be pretty valuable and pretty exciting. And then, there's all sorts of prizes along the way, but we've done it the last few years. We've been successful in raising over 250 grand. I mean, I think I want to say this year we'll be at, somewhere in the neighborhood of like $1 million for these last 4 years of challenges, which has been pretty remarkable.
That's absolutely amazing. And our community that's listening here, we are going to participate. Okay. So here's the deal. Everybody knows that my book's for sale on pre-sale right now. When you pre-sale buy it and you log into the website, we're going to have a form that you can fill out, and it's going to be charity. And that charity, if you write Andrew McMahon on there, we will donate $40 for every book that you purchase, up to 200 books, because we so believe in what you're doing. So everybody, you are saving your receipts already because you know bunches of perks are coming. This is probably my favorite perk that we're giving away. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for letting us be a part of that pursuit. We're really excited.
Well, thank you for your generosity. That's so kind. And if anybody wants to learn more about what we do, I named a couple of the programs, but there's a lot going on. Or if you're a survivor or a patient that's in the middle of this, we have an amazing community built up around the foundation. So you can just go to deerjackfoundation.org and you can learn more about what we do.
Andrew, I love you even more after this conversation. It's been so good. Your music's amazing. What you stand for is amazing. How you show up in this world is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your time today.
Well, I appreciate you, and I'm super inspired by you. And never have I felt more interested in climbing a mountain. So especially now that I know that Mike Posner climbed one with you. So I'm feeling like I gotta figure out how to do that.
Man up. Come on, let's up the game. We're going to challenge.
All right, I'll follow up on that. That'll make for an even better podcast. If I can get my ass up a mountain, that would be impressive.
There we go. I like it. We'll do the highest concert in the world, friends. Highest concert in the world's coming.
That sounds like fun. Yeah, I love that.